In today's episode, we look at a case that would lead to a capture, described by police as a super gang, led by ex-long-haul lorry driver David Sell. David Sell would be the target for police's Operation Escalade to break the stranglehold of the major drug and gun firms. The star witness against Sell was a lead suspect in the Kevin The Gerbil Carrols murder, but an attempted assassination on the witness, and as the brothers of notorious firm go on the run, who would be the next to wear the crown, and how long for? David Sell's gang raked in over £200 million a year as a drug supplier. The police described David Sell's crew as a super gang. They were technically aware of forensics and techniques, of phones, laptops, and cars being bugged. David Sell's gang operated with 9 key members and was extremely tight-knit and reliable. Members of the gangs was an ex-soldier turned gun runner, Martin Fitzsimmons, a cocaine dealer, Mark Richardson, and electronics expert, Francis Mulligan. They became the main distributor of cocaine, not just in Scotland, but in the rest of England and Wales. They had a weapons arsenal that would read like a firearms list in a Hollywood action movie. The weapons and drugs were hidden in 4x4s with converted compartments, and they were locked away in fortified lockups and warehouses hidden from sight behind false walls. The gang invested heavily in state-of-the-art surveillance equipment, which enabled them to do sweeps of their cars and lockups. Unbelievably, they bought the kits such as listening devices that detected illegal transmissions from foreign devices from the same companies that supply police and the military. This was a nightmare for police, and they had to carry out risk assessments to determine if their covert officers were under risk of being discovered. David Sell's name and gang were popping up numerous times on big supplier lists. The American Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, had contacted the police and the National Crime Agency over David Sell and his gang of associates going on trips to South America and Brazil. They'd been spotted with big cartels, and they'd been receiving deliveries off them for the past 2 years. Other big name spots in Brazil were the Gillespie brothers, who were also buying their product from there. This is when the government funded the police's Operation Escalade to bring down the big drug and gun gangs. We shared information collected by the UK police, the DEA, and Interpol. David Sell had made his own trips to Brazil. There he met face to face with cartels to source high purity cocaine. He then arranged shipment of the Class A drug from South America to Europe via West Africa and had influence over how it would be packed and concealed. David Sell's £200 million gang were untouchable. The crew, all having a substantial cut of the profits, made sure there was no bad blood. With every endeavour carried out with military precision, the super gang were about to screw up big time to get revenge on a dealer who had crossed them. It was March 2015. Drug pusher Robert Allan had been involved in a £45,000 deal with the Supergang. Robert Allan arranged the deal with gang member Barry O'Neill, but the arrangement went south when Robert Allan's business partner couldn't come up with the rest of the money. The small-time dealer Robert Allan tried to return the drugs, but was told he still needed to hand over £30,000. Robert Allan did the only thing he could and ran. He had fled to Scotland when he realised he couldn't cover the £30,000 debt he owed to the gang. But David Sell's gang was several steps ahead. They'd already put a tracking device on Allan's car. Robert Allan went into hiding in Barnsley in York. David Sell had found Robert Allan's getaway amusing, but he and his gang knew they had to act. If one dealer doesn't pay, then it will show they are soft, and others might try taking the same liberties. David Sell and some of the gang decided the next day to follow Robert Allan's car. The vehicle tracker on the car led them to a housing estate in Barnsley. Sell was in the BMW X5 with one gang member, and they were followed by 2 other gang members in a van. Robert Allan's car was quickly discovered, parked on the corner of a road, but not outside a house. But David Sell had a plan to flush Robert Allan out. Sal wrote a note and attached it to the windscreen and went back to the BMW and began drinking a can of lager. 2 hours later, Robert Allan looked out the window and he could see a piece of paper under the front wiper. He walked over to the car and discovered a note. It claimed to be from a neighbour and it said, "I would like to discuss a parking space with you." Robert Allan took the note and walked back to his house. David Sal's clever trick had worked, and the gang knew the house Allan was staying in. One of the men began to let the front tyres down on Allan's car and stayed by the BMW. Minutes later, Sal and 2 of the gang walked up to the property, and Sal rung the doorbell as the other 2 gang members entered the garden round the back. Robert Allan opened the door and David Sal smashed a can of Stella into Allan's face. A fight broke out. Allan managed to move Sal out the way of the door and push it shut and lock it. The 2 other gang members went through the rear and smashed the patio window and ran at Allan. Allan was grabbed but managed to fight back. He wrestled a handgun out of one of the gang members' hands. He then kneed him in the crotch and pushed him over. Before Allan could take aim with the gun, he was smashed in the face. Allan hit the floor and lost the gun. He was then pistol whipped by the other gang member. Sal came in through the back and walked through the broken patio window and laughed, and he said to one of the gang members holding his crotch, "How's your nuts?" Sal sat in the armchair and never said a word. One of the gang members shouted at Allan, "You think you can steal from us?" The other gang member wrapped Allan with a chain and said it's not about the money, it's the principle. Allan was carried to the van and thrown in the back. Sal and another gang member got into the van, and the other 2 followed in Sal's BMW. The gang then spent 7 hours driving and drove to an old warehouse in West Lothian, just outside the village of Foldhouse. Robert Allan's ordeal then began. He was battered for more than 24 hours, suffering a broken leg in a sledgehammer attack. During his captivity, he was also pistol whipped with a Beretta 9000, fitted with a silencer. Bleach was then sprayed onto his wounds. He was then asked by one of the gang members, "You okay, mate? I don't want you to die. I don't want to be looking at a murder charge." Allan was then stripped and washed down with a pressure washer. David Sal did not partake in any of the beatings or say a word. The next day, Robert Allan had a hood put over his head and was driven on Friday, March the 13th, 2015, to East Kilbride, where he was dragged from the car. Sal was not with them, and it was just 2 of the gang. One of the gang asked Allan if he was ready, and then shot Allan 3 times in the kneecaps, twice in one and once in the other. He was then ordered to crawl up to the motorway, but couldn't move because of the pain in his legs. The 2 gang members then dragged him to the top of the hill, and then told him to keep rolling down and don't stop. They pushed Allan and he rolled down the hill screaming in pain. One gang member shouted, "Remember, you still owe the money." Allan rolled halfway down and then passed out. The gang members then drove away. Robert Allan was found soon afterwards by a couple walking their dog, and he was rushed to hospital. He spent months being treated for multiple broken bones, and his injuries were potentially life-threatening. Police started investigating Robert Allan's kidnapping, but information was not very forthcoming. Though Robert Allan didn't recognise any of the gang, he named only one that he knew, David Sal. Now, from Robert Allan's statement, David Sal did not take part in any of the beatings or fired a shot. He'd never spoken a word to him, or even had a gun or a weapon, just a can of Stella. There was no physical evidence that David Sal was there. David Sal was interviewed, and he had a cast iron alibi. He was with his mate, who was an accountant. Phone GPS showed Sal was at the address. The accountant, David McFarlane, was questioned, and he confirmed David Sal had come over to his flat. He said that Sal and himself had a few drinks, and David Sal crashed on the sofa. Police had nothing and nowhere to go with it. The assault case on Robert Allan would be kept open. David Sal had thought several steps ahead. By not saying a word and not taking part in the beatings, Police really had nothing but a scuffle with a can of Stella. They needed to prove he was there and ordered the kidnapping. Two years later, an Operation Escalade was well underway. A rival firm run by the Gillespies was a target for the police operation. With evidence gathering and arrest imminent, the Gillespie brothers fled to Brazil, a place where they bought their product from. James the Don White would do a full takeover of the Gillespies' abandoned drug empire, with second in command Paul the Captain Fleming. Another police target was David Sell's huge operation, a network he established. Police forensic accounting put yearly takings of the gang at over £100 million, but it was more likely closer to £200 million because they also dealt in Europe. At the beginning of January, police were monitoring several locations of David Sell's gang. Police radio silence was maintained, as Sell's gang had the equipment to pick up any transmissions from the area. Police were also very well aware that CCTV cameras all pointed to the outside of the buildings, covering every road in. As part of Operation Escalade, two officers were watching a silver Toyota Yaris in Church Street, on the outskirts of Glasgow. They had spotted a member of Sell's gang, Mark Richardson. As he walked back to his Toyota Yaris, he spotted the police and calmly turned away from the car. Police ordered him to the ground, but Mark Richardson ran off. He was tackled to the ground later by armed police. Mark Richardson was searched and the police sergeant picked up the set of keys in his belongings. The police walked over to the Toyota Yaris, and the key fob didn't look like anything that belonged to the car. They pressed the button and you could hear an electrical whirring noise coming from the boot. The key fob had activated a Bluetooth receiver. There was a metal plate in the boot of the Yaris which came up on a hydraulic ram, a hidden compartment. If police had pulled over the car on a routine stop, there is no way they'd ever have spotted it. In the compartment was a holster containing a 9mm Glock 17 handgun. The pistol contained Richardson's DNA and was loaded with 15 bullets. It was the first incident which started the destruction of David Sell's operation. The following week, officers discovered several set of keys, including one labelled Annie, an industrial unit off Crosside Avenue in Croftfoot area of South Glasgow. Another unit on Westburn Farm Road was a key logistical hub and was believed to be the main workshop where Francis Mulligan and Anthony Woods modified some of the gang's £250,000 fleet of vehicles. By cross-referencing the keys to the addresses linked to the gang, police arrived at a lockup on Whittingham Drive, Annisland, in the West End of Glasgow on the 5th of February 2017. There the gang rented a space under a false name and paid a monthly £500 fee up front and in cash. There was a big shiny door with 2 padlocks, and the rest were all wooden doors falling apart. Detective Chief Superintendent McLean described how he had a key fob with the word Annie on it, and he said we was in Annisland. It was a real golden nugget. Inside, officers found 11 guns, all neatly packaged and labelled. They included Glock pistols, a Heckler & Koch submachine gun, and an M75 hand grenade. But the diamond of the haul would be the discovery of torture victim Robert Allan's DNA on a Beretta 9000 pistol, with a silencer, which had been used to pistol whip him in March 2015. With the rest of the haul was surveillance equipment that had never been seen before, state of the art, and it showed police and government how far behind law enforcement was, and the security holes that needed to be filled. The gang had little to no digital footprint, and the reason being was they had jamming surveillance equipment that would shield their phone signals. Police's devices would not be able to pick up any of the gang's phone signals. Police detectives described the firepower at the disposal of the crime group as unprecedented in terms of the history of organised crime in Scotland. The The trial of the 9-man gang was expected to last 3 months. David Sell pleaded not guilty. His alibi, David McFarlane, 61 years old, told a court that David Sell, who was 51, was visiting his home when he was accused in a kidnap and torture attack on Robert Allan. Paul the Captain Fleming, who was prime suspect in Kevin The Gerbil Carrols shooting, was the right-hand man to James the Don White, who took over the Gillespie brothers' firm when they fled to Brazil. Fleming was on the prosecution's witness list, but before he was due to give evidence in the case, it is thought he was targeted by rivals who were trying to warn him off. Paul Fleming escaped the hit unarmed, but crashed his motor as he fled. Police said he made his way home on foot after the attack in Lenzie, near Glasgow. But in a sudden twist after the botched hit on Fleming, he and other witnesses were spared having to give evidence when David Sell and the rest of his gang pleaded guilty, preventing the need for an expected 3-month-long trial. In pleading guilty, doing this, David Sell had threw his alibi under the bus, showing David McFarlane as a liar. David McFarlane was taken into custody. David Sell, who's 51 years old, was jailed for 15 years and 8 months for his role in the abduction and torture of Robert Allan. Barry O'Neill, who's 37 years old, was locked up for 7 years and 4 months for cocaine supply. Anthony Woods, who's 44 years old, the electronics expert for the gang, got 11 years and 1 month sentence after he pleaded guilty to having roles in serious organised crime. Francis Mulligan, who's 41 years old, was jailed for 8 years and 324 days for the charge of having a role in a serious organised crime. Michael Bowman, who's 30 years old, was sentenced to 7 years for the charge of having a role in serious organised crime. Gerard Doherty, who was 42 years old, was sentenced to 10 years and 6 months after a shooting at a house in Edinburgh. Mark Richardson, 30 years old, was sentenced to 8 years and 9 months for possessing a Glock handgun. Stephen McArdle, 33 years old, was sentenced to 7 years and 100 days after he was also caught with a Glock handgun. Ex-Army War veteran Martin Fitzsimmons, 37 years old, was locked up for 10.5 years for having an automatic handgun, as well as ammo and £36,000 of dirty money. After a trial, a statement by police read, "Their operation centres on the importation of vast quantities of cocaine. Their role is as wholesalers to other organised crime groups. They are top of the chain in terms of drugs transactions in Scotland and UK as a whole. The firepower that disposed of the crime group is unprecedented in terms of the history of organised crime in Scotland." A year later, in 2019, accountant David McFarlane was sentenced to 3 years in prison for giving a false alibi to David Sell. James the Don White took over the Gillespies' abandoned drug empire and was sentenced to 10 years in 2023 for drug trafficking and connections to organised crime. When proceeds of crime started disassembling White's empire, it was joked about that he had more money than the company Rolex. Paul Fleming will also be found guilty and was sentenced to 9 years for his role in the drug empire. Joe Shields, defence lawyer to David Sell, was attacked and slashed with a knife. He would survive with life-changing injuries. The Gillespie brothers fled to Brazil, but it is believed they had been murdered by the gang protecting them. Robert Allan, after being kneecapped to this day, has to walk aided and has been left with permanent injuries. This was not the first time David Sell and his gang had carried out such beatings, but the fear created by the gang, their access to cars, guns and money, the inability for police to get any evidence on them because the gang was forensically and technically aware, their vast earning sums, would lead to police calling them the first Supergang. Operation Escalade will slowly wind down, though some cases against other criminals are still being investigated. Until these are completed, Escalade is still an ongoing operation. The DEA and Interpol have tracked assets and property connected to James the Don White and David Sell and his gang in Europe, and they are in the process of being seized or already have been confiscated. The UK police have already seized a large proportion of assets of the drugs gangs. This includes property, artwork, cars, boats, jewellery and cash, including legit companies that had been bought. Before you used to get caught, do your time, but you knew you would walk out to the money and property you acquired before you was convicted. Crime did pay, but this has all changed. Going after criminal proceeds is a big earner for the government, and it's an easy one for them. There are no victims, just the crooks. Every time something is seized, it's a gold star for the government's fight on crime. In very rare circumstances do criminals dispute what's been confiscated. They have to prove what the government has seized was bought with clean money.